This video is sponsored by Odoo. My friends, since the debacle in Mali, France is looking really hard for any way it can to beef with Russia.
J'aime me battre.
Here you can see the first out of 2,000 Ukrainian soldiers that arrived in France in fall for extensive military training. These men will form the core of a brand new unit called the 155th Mechanized Brigade.
6 months later.
And it's gone.
After the failure of the European Union military assistance mission, where NATO tried to convince everyone that their training was the best, France stepped in for something more drastic. After the postponed Operation Croissant on the Dnieper, France came up with Task Force Champagne. The French government pledged to train an entire Ukrainian mechanized brigade nicknamed Anne de Kiev, which will be based on the French army model, and that will be equipped with 150 French-made armored vehicles and artillery pieces. After months of intensive drills involving urban warfare, but especially realistic trench-to-trench fighting, these Ukrainian soldiers will now head to the front.
Fuck.
I think you really needed the French to take the initiative, and for such out-of-the-box ideas. But is it going to be enough for the Ukrainian army to turn the tide? Especially when we remember Experiment 1.0 with the NATO-trained 47th Mechanized Brigade.
No!
Jokes aside, in this video we will analyze why this brigade was even necessary, the unique training program they followed, and then we will go through the possible strengths and weaknesses of this Ukrainian 155th Mechanized Brigade. The first criticism I have is that their webpage is in serious need of an update. In today's digital world, big dreams require a solid online presence. If you don't know where to start, the Odoo website builder is the tool you need to take your website to the next level. It's fast, simple, and free for life if you only use the app. With Odoo, you can create a professional website within minutes. It's straightforward and you don't even need to know how to code. With Odoo's powered website configurator, you can simply write in words what you want as part of your vision. From there, make your website stand out by choosing from one of many sleek themes that you can customize at will with easy-to-use tools. Click to edit, drag and drop, 3D elements, animations, they've got it all. What I particularly love is how they made creating an e-commerce website so easy. With Odoo, you can design stunning, high-converting product pages in a few clicks only. And if you struggle to find the right words that match your brand, Odoo can help you with a ChatGPT copyright integration. Whether you're an experienced entrepreneur or just starting out, bring your vision to the next level with Odoo. Not only is your first application free for life, but Odoo also offers a free custom domain for 1 year. Just click the link in the description below and revolutionize your online presence today. So why did Ukraine need France for this new brigade? On the 5th of May, The Economist interviewed General Alexander Pavlyuk, the commander of Ukraine's ground forces. One of the most urgent tasks on the general's desk is raising 10 new brigades. To which he added, equipment, not meat, men is the main bottleneck. Okay, we can all agree that he's coping a little bit. Because on the 24th of November, the same Economist reported, Ukraine's problems, meanwhile, are worsening mainly because of manpower issues. The army is long out of willing recruits, and its mobilization campaign is falling short, recruiting barely 2/3 of its target. And we already know they're mobilizing roughly 30,000 men every month. And you're telling me that's not enough? Anyway, a couple weeks later in September, Zelensky said, Ukraine cannot equip even 4 out of 14 required military brigades, which, spoilers, are meant for the 2025 summer counteroffensive. Now, one of these new units was the 155th Brigade. As you can see, the insignia of this formation features a scorpion, alongside the flag of Rivne Oblast, indicating the brigade's home region. All this in front of a black and red background. I know, it's a coincidence, okay? Graphic design aside, thing is, due to the lack of armored vehicles, this brigade was classified as an infantry brigade. Another dilemma that Ukraine faced was the training of conscripts. For some time, it was believed that the answer was providing Ukrainian mobilized personnel with NATO training. Since the beginning of the war, nearly 75,000 recruits went through this European training mission. NATO instructors did their best to accompany these men through basic training. Apart from the limited time, these instructors had a hard time transmitting actual combat knowledge to the recruits. But there's yet another problem. These Mobics that train together for weeks and that build some sort of comradeship, They were not sent as whole units to the front, but as individual replacement to plug the gaps wherever it was needed. As you can imagine, the morale and the cohesion among the rank and file was extremely low. And if the armed forces of Ukraine didn't have enough to deal with, another dilemma is that most Ukrainian brigades are equipped with a patchwork of NATO and Soviet vehicles, where there's no consistency in terms of doctrine or maintenance. That's where France stepped in. The French government pledged to form a combat-ready brigade within 9 weeks, fully outfitted with French military equipment, and prepare them for battle as a unified force, thereby ending the piecemeal approach to military support for Ukraine. It was coherent because French army training has to be combined with French military equipment. That's how the Ukrainian 155th Infantry Brigade was restructured into a mechanized brigade. However, the French had a couple requirements. First, the French said, "We do not want the Swiss flag on the emblem. Obviously, it looks much better with the French flag," but that was non-negotiable. So then the French settled for choosing the slogan of the brigade. They picked one in reference to the Battle of Verdun. The motto that was selected is "On ne passe pas," translated in English as "They shall not pass."
You shall not pass!
The French also chose the brigade's nickname to be Anne de Kiev. Or rather, this version, but nobody actually says that. Nobody says Anne de Kiev. It sounds very weird in French. Check out, this reporter used the Ukrainian spelling but used the Russian pronunciation.
Cette brigade rebaptisée Anne de Kiev.
Long story short, Anne de Kiev was a princess of modern-day Ukraine, daughter of Grand Prince Yaroslav I, who married Henry I, King of the Franks in the year 1051. We can all agree they reached pretty far back in the past. The goal was to reinforce the symbolic historical ties between France and Ukraine. In September, 2,300 Ukrainian soldiers arrived in France, more specifically in the barracks of the Camp de Mormelon in the region of Champagne in the northeast of France. Hence the Task Force Champagne to train them. I really hope for every village these guys liberate, they're gonna pop a bottle of champagne. Additionally, it was announced that the 155th Mechanized Brigade would be deployed with 128 VAB armored personnel carriers, 18 AMX-10 RC reconnaissance tanks, 18 Caesar self-propelled cannons, as well as trucks and mortars. Cyprien, what about the mining vehicles? I don't know if it's a coincidence, but right next to this training camp, there is a Russian World War I memorial to honor the fallen soldiers of the Russian Expeditionary Corps sent to France between 1916 and 1918. They mentioned it in this picture where it says Ukrainian trace or Ukrainian heritage. And in this next one it said how thousands of Ukrainian soldiers fought near Verdun. Not sure about that, but at least now we know why they chose the slogan, "They shall not pass." What they also forgot to mention is how in 1917, these Russian and Ukrainian soldiers rebelled and refused to go to the front. So the French army encircled the camp of La Courtine, brought in numerous artillery batteries and crushed the mutiny. Now back to 2024. Contrary to previous NATO training, the strength of this training mission was that the French listened to the feedback of Ukrainian soldiers in order to come up with a realistic training program based on the combat experience gained in Donbass. This means no need to teach them about NATO air-land battle. Instead, the recruits went through trench warfare tactics, with drones flying above their heads, and constant drills simulating heavy artillery fire. The idea was to train Ukrainian recruits, in an environment as close as possible to the real-life conditions at the front. The training program of the French army for the 155th Mechanized Brigade was separated into 3 phases. Number 1, basic training for the recruits, as well as in-depth practical training on vehicles and equipment. Number 2, form the battalions and teach them how to maneuver as part of coherent units. Number 3, inter-arm integration, as well as training Ukrainian commanders on battalion and brigade level operations. But there was one thing I noticed that was strange. Now, the French commanders in charge of this program announced that 2,000 of these Ukrainian recruits were mobilized personnel, of which a small percentage were volunteers, but there were another 300 who were actual veterans with combat experience. I was wondering if these Ukrainian veterans would actually be the real instructors for the conscripts, which would make the most sense. But according to the pictures that were posted online, is French soldiers in their early 20s teaching war to men in their late 30s and 40s. It was even mentioned that Task Force Champagne was composed of 1,500 French military personnel. Usually you have 5 instructors per platoons of 40 men, so 1 instructor for 8 recruits. But now it's almost 1-to-1. That's a lot. Can you guess the reason behind this ratio? Other than that, French cooks even adapted their menu to accommodate Ukrainian soldiers, on top of croissant for breakfast, of course. At lunch, they offered Ukrainian staples like sausages, cabbage, and a little bit of corruption. Honestly, I think these Ukrainian soldiers were very comfortable in France. In this article, we can even read, soldiers in combat gear who are off duty linger, lift weights, or smoke outside. That's where one of the French came and said, "Guys, let's take photos for memories." As I told you earlier, from a tactical perspective, we note the focus on trench warfare. Here you can see French instructors above the parapets, coordinating step by step how the Ukrainians should move through this dugout lane. It was reported that the French military built 600 meters of trenches and underground firing positions, very similar to the ones we could find in Ukraine. From all the NATO training footage I saw in the past 2 years, for the first time these trenches actually look legit and realistic, much better than the ones built by the Brits. In this footage we see a VAB approaching a trench that would allow the Ukrainian soldiers to practice disembarking quickly from the vehicle and storm the enemy position. What's funny is that during these exercises you also had an army of Svetlanas translating all the instructions. Look guys, I know what happened in the tents. There will be a surprise in 9 months. In terms of small arms, we can see that the majority of Ukrainian recruits are using AKs, which is good because those are the weapons they will be using at the front. But I've also seen others use a mix of M4 carbines and AR-15s. And to be honest, I don't really know why. Some were even spotted with the good old FAMAS. After trench tactics, the second focus was urban warfare, where Ukrainian recruits were essentially taught CQB and how to clear an entire row of houses. Pretty standard stuff. We could also see some sniper courses working with explosives, demining a path, handling of anti-tank weapons, and so on. Most importantly, drones were a focal point of the training mission. They were used both in support of an attack and to train the recruits on how to avoid them in defense. Meanwhile, in this picture you can see the control room where Ukrainian officers overview the maneuvers of their troops on the ground using a drone. Once again, it's much better and thorough than any other training mission by European partners. These guys might actually have a chance. Of course, Ukrainian artillerymen also trained on the truck-mounted Caesars. Equipage of 5, maneuver, fire, reload, essentially the basics. While others trained on 120mm mortars, which are very much liked by the AFU. While the riflemen were trudging in the mud. Their officers and the staff of the brigade went through a multitude of war games and various map exercises, where they simulated units maneuvering on the map. As you can see, every level of the brigade is going through intensive training. And that's a program that has never been done before by European partners. A couple days before departure, the brigade held a ceremony for the saber of the best commander. This initiative was introduced to encourage all military personnel to excel in combat missions. Here you can see the saber engraved with the name of the unit and with the words "to the best commander" written on it. It's a transitional award that will be presented monthly to a new owner who has distinguished themselves in service. Like Costco Employee of the Month type of thing with the zest of samurai. Not gonna lie, it's pretty epic. So when you look at the videos and the pictures, it all looks beautiful and very promising. However, if you don't understand French, you'll skip through many subtle statements made by officials. For example, in the videos, we see how the Ukrainian recruits have already been separated into riflemen, artillerymen, and the crews for the vehicles. That's because in an interview, one of the French commanders explained how the Ukrainians already went through 1 month of basic training in Ukraine before going to France. And if you read between the lines, you understand that the French instructors were really there to cover the technical aspects of this training course, essentially how to use these French-made weapons. Then I will paraphrase what Capitaine Arnaud said in another interview. The focus of the formation was a 3-week course on maintenance and teaching the troops how they can repair the equipment by themselves on the ground. This is a very important component of a training mission, but it also means that the French admitted that they can't really teach the Ukrainians on how to use these vehicles in actual combat situations. And my friends, the cherry on top, I quote, 1,500 soldiers were mobilized during this course, an opportunity for them to also experience new ways of combat. Now we know why so many French soldiers were part of Task Force Champagne. And check out what Colonel Alban had to say.
On n'a pas l'expérience d'un combat à parité. Donc de la guerre de deux armées constituées, équipées avec du matériel moderne. Ça, nous, on le redécouvre avec eux.
At the end of the video, they even said it's a win-win situation for the French army. In the end, as you can see, on the surface, there is a political objective for Macron to be portrayed as a leader in Europe versus the more pragmatic objectives of the French military. That is to empty old storage facilities in exchange for French soldiers to get some retour d'expérience, some direct combat experience from Ukrainian soldiers.
Sacré Hubert, you are so French.
Online, I found this possible unofficial structure of the Anne de Kiev Brigade. Let's go through it together. As you can see, the brigade will be composed of 3 mechanized battalions, each one composed of 3 companies of 100 to 150 men, so 40 VABs for 36 squads, or effectively 1 armored vehicle per squad of 10 riflemen, plus 4 VABs for communication and command. To this we can add a mortar battery, plus fire support, recon, and anti-aircraft platoons, for a total of 500 to 600 men per mechanized battalion. Then according to this diagram, there's also a rifle battalion, an artillery group, and a recon detachment. Although this looks great on paper, there are a couple questions we should ask ourselves. The first one is that at the top it states 1,500 men. But when we put all the units together, we're closer to 2,000, 2,300. Before I can answer this question, we have to go through an analysis of the equipment these Ukrainian soldiers will use. So officially we're talking about a mechanized brigade. In reality, this formation would be labeled by the French as a BLB, Brigade Légère Blindée, or Lightly Armored Brigade. Let's start with the VAB, which stands for Véhicule de l'Avant Blindé, or Armored Vanguard Vehicle. Its production started in the 1970s and is categorized as an APC, an Armored Personnel Carrier. The VAB can transport 10 fully equipped infantrymen, so that's good. And as it could be demonstrated by its extensive use in the Sahel region, it has great off-road capabilities. However, its firepower is pretty limited. We're talking about a 50 cal M2 Browning or coaxial AA-52 7.5mm machine gun. This means the VAB can only really be used against infantry. In my opinion, from a tactical perspective, VABs will be utilized by the Ukrainian army like the American-made M113 APC. They have approximately the same weight, but instead of being tracked, the VABs are on wheels. There are 2 versions, the one with 4 wheels and the other with 6 wheels. The VAB is also more robust than the M113 due to its composite armor. As you can see in these pictures, even after a hit, the body of the vehicle is almost intact. With that being said, yes, the windows are by far the greatest weakness of the vehicle. Now in regards to the wheels, when it was first introduced to Ukrainian units, they reported that artillery fire and shrapnel would quickly puncture the tires. With that being said, I haven't heard much complaints since then. Other than that, wheeled APCs like the VAB are much easier to repair than tracked vehicles. And if needs be, the Russians can also lend a hand for repairs. In comparison, the AMX-10RC cannot transport any riflemen, while at the same time it's not really a tank. Look, the AMX-10RC doesn't care what you think. Its identity is not fixed, it's fluid. The AMX-10RC is often categorized as an armored reconnaissance vehicle. For instance, RC stands for roue canon or wheeled cannon, which is literally what it is. And yeah, the MX-10RC is also on wheels just like the VAB. The main armament of the MX-10RC is a low-pressure 105mm rifle to gun, plus a coaxial machine gun in secondary. As you can see, it's much less powerful than the main battle tank. The armor is also lacking. The smallest 25 or 30mm cannon is enough to pierce through the frontal sector. This means the MX-10RC has neither the protection nor the firepower sufficient to be used as a combat tank. It's essentially an obsolete vehicle because the reconnaissance aspect is now fully taken over by drones. The best you can do with it is shoot and scoot fire missions. Long-range sniping, I don't know. We all remember how the Ukrainian 37th Marine Brigade fielded a number of AMX-10 RCs during the 2023 summer counteroffensive. Thing is, they used them like normal tanks and they got wrecked. Of course, they were marketed as light tanks and just shipped off to Ukraine without any doctrine or training. I also heard Ukrainian soldiers complain about problems with their gearboxes, saying the vehicle was unsuitable on dirt roads. I just hope that the French army found a better way for their MX-10 RCs to be used in combat, because at this point I only see them being used as self-propelled artillery. That's actually one thing we could notice in one of the training videos, where the MX-10 RCs are firing from a distance as part of a battery. But there's also this video, where we see 6 Ukrainian recruits in double file formation walking behind the MX-10 RC. Now that I'm thinking about it, the MX-10 RC could be very good in an urban setting. It's quick, it's lightweight, it has a compact size, and its 105mm cannon can easily penetrate buildings or the average BTRs and BMPs. Other than that, we can quickly talk about the French-built, truck-mounted, self-propelled Caesar 155mm gun. Look, long story short, it's excellent, nothing to complain about. Ukraine just wants more and more of them. As you can see, the 155th Brigade is a pretty lightweight formation. It would excel at rapid exploitation attacks, as part of its second wave for example, but it lacks the firepower to deal real damage to the enemy, so it cannot be used to break through enemy lines. In my opinion, the brigade is missing IFVs, because on top of the VABs, a typical French lightly armored brigade fields 100 VBCE. Those are actual infantry fighting vehicles that can each carry 9 riflemen. They offer good protection and are equipped with a 25mm autocannon similar to the one on the M2A2 Bradley. I feel that 18 VBCs would be much more useful to this brigade than 18 MX-10 RC wheeled cannons. But that's my opinion. What do you think? One explanation is that the French army wanted to empty its storage facilities and get rid of its older vehicles. As I was recording this, I learned that on the 28th of November, a French-made AMX-10P was destroyed in Kursk Oblast. The AMX-10P is a French-made IFV produced in the 1970s, and the latest footage confirms the delivery of a number of these vehicles from France to Ukraine. With that being said, everyone understood the weakness of this brigade. So to beef up this formation into an actual mechanized brigade, it was decided to attach an armored battalion to it of 31 Leopard 2A4 tanks. Now, that's where you'll tell me, the French military doesn't use Leopard 2s. Well, yeah, exactly. These Leopard 2 crews trained in Poland with the 10th Armored Brigade of the Polish Armed Forces, under the instruction of Norwegian soldiers. So this entire narrative of inter-arm maneuver warfare training, it's all BS. How can you realistically talk about inter-arm training when you're missing the most important component? Tanks.
How? You just need to believe.
Now who will lead this brigade? What we know is that on September 15th, Colonel Dmytro Ryumshin was appointed commander of the 155th Mechanized Brigade. As a reminder, before that, Ryumshin was the commander of the legendary 47th Mechanized Brigade, which he led during the final weeks of the Battle of Avdiivka. However, after a surprise visit by Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky, Ryumshin was relieved of command in March 2024, not even 2 months after his appointment. But we don't know exactly why, so that's all I can tell you. However, check out what Colonel Ryumshin told French newspaper Le Monde on the 15th of November. When we will be engaged in combat, our brigade will show its level of competence. I believe in our victory. Okay, I like the confidence, it's good. And what did he say next? The level of training of our soldiers is high enough to go into combat. Hold on, what? I hope it's a joke. What do you mean ready for combat? Conscripts with 9 to 12 weeks of training, fully ready for war. Wow, I'm actually very scared now. At last, let's talk about the military personnel. In all the reports and articles, it was clearly stated that France does not plan on training a second brigade at the moment. Okay, so what about replacements? Casualties are bound to happen. If you don't have well-trained replacements to make up for combat losses, we know what's going to happen. The Ukrainians will just fill in the gaps with men they snatched off the streets, and the quality of the brigade will just crash. Just like what happened, wait for it, to the 47th Mechanized Brigade. I did some more digging and that's what I found out. France is not actually training the entire 155th Mechanized Brigade. Like I told you earlier, on paper, the brigade is manned by 4,500 soldiers. Yet only 2,300 went to France. This leads me to believe that Task Force Champagne only took care of the technical aspect of the training mission, meaning they only formed the mechanized battalions and the artillery component. Meanwhile, the remaining 2,200 soldiers, so the entire second half of the brigade, well, they all trained in Ukraine. Then this entire training mission was dumb and useless. It was all for nothing. Just yet another PR stunt. In the end, it's just yet another Ukrainian mechanized brigade, but with French equipment. I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I'm worried for these guys. In late November, it was announced that the Kiev Brigade was returning from France to Ukraine. Volunteers closely connected to the 155th Mechanized Brigade confirmed that the 2nd and 3rd Mechanized Battalions are expected to return to Ukraine soon and be deployed to one of the most intense conflict zones right away. So what can we expect from this brigade? Knowing the Ukrainians, they'll probably just pitch them right into a new offensive very soon. If I had to guess, somewhere in Kursk Oblast. On an operational level, it would be the best to deploy them in some urban area, like Tarietsk, Chasiv Yar, or around Kupiansk, where they could, in theory, counterattack and regain some lost ground. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comment section what you thought of my analysis. If you're new to this channel, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, make sure to check out my Patreon or PayPal. The links are in the description below.